Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where and when you're watching this broadcast. I'm Thomas Fessler, my friends, and this is Disclosure tonight. Good evening, everybody, depending on, well, where you're at, of course. We've got a great interview going on here today with a APRO insider and someone who's bringing us some unbelievable UFO history with Mr. Alan Lavigne. On that note, let me go ahead and introduce our guest today. Fasten your seatbelts and grab your night vision goggles, because today's live stream is going to beam us right into the heart of UFO disclosure. We've got Alan Lavigne here, and trust me, he's not your average Joe. He's a seasoned veteran from APRO, the group that kickstarted the whole UFO chase before MUFON or New Fork were even a twinkle in the sky. Imagine it's 1952 and UFOs are wowing Washington, and Alan's diving into investigations that would later inspire these screen hits like Fire in the Sky and make Roswell a household name. From talking telepathy with Betty Hill to analyzing abductions, Alan's seen it all. And guess what? He's also a maestro with the brush, leading the Bronze Armory Studios and leaving his artistic mark in museums from San Francisco to San Diego. So are you ready to journey through the tales of extraterrestrial encounters and government secrets with a man who's been to the front line and beyond? A good friend and frequent guest on the Richard Dolan Show. Let's launch this cosmic adventure and welcome Alan Lavigne. My gosh, this is amazing.
Thank you.
Welcome, Alan. How you doing today, my friend? It's great that you can join us here on Disclosure tonight.
Excellent. I'm very happy and honored to be on your show tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a good friend of our good friend Mike, not Mike Disclosure, but Mike, who's our attorney, who's put together our disclaimer at the front of the show. You've been into so many things. Do you want to give a little intro, if you want to call it, a little bit information of back history about yourself, Alan, and how you got involved into the whole UFO genre?
Certainly. It was really quite accidental. It was 1974, June 17th. Exactly 7:30 p.m. I know the time, because back then I was quite a stickler for getting places on time, and I was on my way to pick up my fiance, and I knew it took exactly a half hour to get over there. So I was leaving my house, and I was driving north down my driveway towards the Catalina Mountain Range to turn left onto Bellevue Avenue. And over the Catalina Range, I saw what I thought was an early star, because at 7:30 that was sunset on that date, and it was really bright. And I thought, oh, that's why mariners, used to use the stars to navigate. Look how bright that is. I thought it was Polaris because it was north over the Catalinas. And as I turned left onto Bellevue, I was driving a enormous car. Is a Oldsmobile Delta 88, which are just, people wouldn't be familiar with those today, but back then that just was
what year of a Delta 88 was it?
That year. Oh, well, it was probably 76 or 77. It was a couple years.
Yeah, that was a great year. Last year's it was large before GM went and downsized everything in 2000 and actually 1978. Beautiful car.
It was huge. And I mentioned that because I had great visibility, because I've been back to that scene since then, and you can't see as good as you could with that car. So I'm looking to the north as I'm driving west, and I see this, what I thought was a star, start to move and descend down over the range. I thought, oh, that's not a star at all. That's why it's so bright. That must be the police helicopter, which was a common sight in Tucson at the time. And it just kept descending at an arc and got brighter and brighter and brighter till the point I go like, that's not the police helicopter. And at this time it was starting to get dark in the west, and this thing swooped over the road, swooped over Bellevue to the from north to south, and then glided back in and stayed stationary over the road. And at this point, I could see it very clearly. It had gotten much larger, about, I'd say, 2 to 3 times larger than the full moon. And what it looked like, if you took a magnifying glass and moved it across the night sky, across the stars, you could see within the magnifying glass area the stars distorted and larger than the surrounding stars. That's what it appeared like. And around it was a bluish lavender glow that moved counterclockwise around that.
So if I may,
now,
if I may add this to really quick,
sure.
what you're talking about, Alan, is gravitational lensing. Basically, when you have a craft that has a gravitational warp field around it, like we saw with the craft going in 2014 with the Aguadilla incident in Puerto Rico. When the craft was moving along, the gravitational warp field around it is actually causing a gravitational lensing. Now, depending on the direction you're seeing the craft, you may see that lensing going on. It may go invisible. You may see duplicate objects. So it's amazing. You're one of the first people that I've heard talking about seeing gravitational lensing. That's amazing, Alan.
And I've mentioned that a number of times, like the Homeland Security footage where the craft goes underwater and then pops back out. Looks like there's two. I've shared, no, that's not, it didn't morph into two things. You're just looking at the effect of the water on the gravitational lensing, and you're seeing a duplicate image. And I believe that's, I didn't know it at the time, but I believe that's exactly what I was looking at when I saw this thing over the road. And I first off slowed to a crawl, then I stopped altogether and stopped the car. The engine was still running. I put it in the park and I got out of the car. And I go, somebody else has to see this. So I looked back down Bellevue and I could see pretty much as far as Alvernon Road. And there was no cars coming at all. In front of me was Country Club Road, and I could see cars going from north to south, but they didn't seem to notice this object in the sky. But it was extremely close. And as many witnesses have shared about their sightings, it was close enough I could have thrown something at it and hit it. It was that close. And so I'm looking up at it, and I'm looking at this glow and this magnifying thing, and I start to think, oh, maybe this is radioactive. Maybe I'm bathing myself in radiation from this object and I don't even know it. And I started to, you know how your adrenaline starts to rise up in you, and I go like, this is not normal. And I started to get very concerned. And I thought maybe I should get back in the car. And then it hit me. I thought it was like somebody was standing right next to me. A voice saying, don't be afraid. We mean you no harm.
Yeah.
And I like, who said that? It literally startled me because I'm watching this intense image and then I hear this voice.
Yeah.
And after they said that,
it was calming, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't so much calming as I felt like I got a shot of, you know, serotonin or dopamine or something.
Exactly.
I mean, it was so impactful.
Can I add on to this as well? Same thing that happened to me, Alan, when I had an experience around the same year that you did. Mine was in 1973, I think. You get this euphoria that just washes over your entire body, and all the different cares in the world just kind of wash away.
Oh, yeah. It was, I knew immediately it felt like I was drugged. I mean, it was that profound. It's just like I had been injected with something. I couldn't have cared less. Yeah, anything could have happened at that point, and it wouldn't have made any difference to me. Car could have rear-ended me or whatever, and could have cared less. So I'm saying they're still watching it, and after that experience, it suddenly just zoomed off to the west. For those who may be old enough to remember the old vacuum tube television sets, when you used to turn them off, the picture would just go down to like a little pinpoint of light. That's exactly what it looked like as it zoomed off to the west.
Wow.
And that was it. And I go like, that is a UFO. I knew right away, never having seen anything before, that was a UFO. I didn't know anything about gravitational effects at the time, or that the blue lavender glow indicated plasma discharge into the oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere, but I knew it was a strange event. So my fiance, who later became my wife at the time, she used to wait for me outside her apartment, and I'm hoping, I hope, you know, she was outside, she saw the same thing. And but when I got there, her the to the west, so she didn't see a thing. You know, that was it. And until the day, I went over to a friend's house. They were childhood friends of mine from elementary school, Steve and Bill Madonna. And Bill wasn't there, but Steve was there, and I shared with him what I had seen. And he says, "Oh, you should report that to APRO." I go, "Oh, I've heard of them," because APRO being in Tucson, they occasionally were asked to comment on UFO reports and stuff on the local news. And so we grabbed the old phone book and looked up APRO, and I called Jim Lorenzen, answered the phone, and I shared with him the sighting. He asked me a bunch of questions. Later, I found out he was filling out a form. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, have you know, did anybody else report this? Anybody else see this?" And he goes like, "No, you know, you're the first one," but he says others may report it later. And I said, "Okay, thank you." So I thought, well, that's that. But I was then curious about APRO. You know, who are they? Where are their offices? You know, I looked at the address. It was very close to where I was living. I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go over there in a day or two and check it out and see what they're like, what their office is like, and meet this guy I talked to on the phone. And so the very next, and I thought too, I've got something to offer, because I had at that point 6 years of machine engineering, aerospace engineering. I worked at Hughes Aircraft.
Hey, Alan, if you could rewind 30 about 20 seconds. We're dealing with a bunch of solar flares going on right now, and they're affecting the communication. So every once in a while, you're kind of fading out a little bit. Can you just back up about 15 seconds?
Sure. So after speaking to APRO on the phone, I thought, I'm going to go over there and check them out in a day or two, and just see what their operation's about, meet the guy I talked to. And I thought, I've got something to offer them, because I had, at that point, 6 years of machine drafting and engineering. I wanted to go into aerospace engineering. My parents worked at Hughes Aircraft. It was the only job they had their entire lives. And I thought, oh, this is an opportunity. I could maybe talk to them about making models, or, you know, drafting images of UFOs or whatever. That was in my mind. A young guy, you know, you get crazy ideas. So I thought, hey, I got something to offer them. I'll go by there. So their address wasn't far from my place, and I go over there, and it's not an office at all. It's a picturesque, sweet little cottage, picture perfect little white house with a white picket fence. And it's got a mailbox with APRO on it. I go like, oh, this is a home operation. Okay. So I just go to the door and knock, and Jim answered the door. I introduced myself, and he invited me in, introduced me to Coral. And they were very gregarious, very friendly. And I shared with them, you know, what I had seen again, and pitched the idea that maybe I could be some use as an artist with them, a technical artist. And they said, sure, you know, love to have someone like that. Well, it wasn't long after that they got a legitimate office, which later they expanded to even a larger office after a couple of years. And you know, Jim, his first call to me wasn't to do, I was surprised, it wasn't to do a drawing, basically. It was to do an interview with a person that has a story, an elderly woman who had said she had contact with aliens. It didn't turn out to be, in my opinion, a legitimate thing, but you know, you know, some people have some wild stories. You got to take them all seriously. And so I went over and spoke to her, did the whole thing, and then Jim later debriefed me. And what I learned, that became a constant thing. Jim never did interviews himself. He always tasked me with interviews. This person, go out, look at the scene, and then I report back to him. And one of the things he shared with me, cautioned me about, which I was, at that time, I had no connection with, as an intelligence analyst, as I was later. But he cautioned me, you don't need to take notes, is how he put it. Just tell me what you heard. And he emphasized that a couple times. There's no need to take notes, write anything down. You don't need to do that. And,
no need to take
I
notes.
met
That's
his
like the
best.
first, if you want to call it, at least an outline, what's going on. He can remember it, but that just kind of makes everything recalling and getting all the information. But that's an interesting technique.
Well, I now know from being an intelligence analyst, that's common. It's what's called pencils up. If you're going to convey something of secrecy, don't take notes.
Gotcha. So it's more of oh wow, that would almost think that you would think that the people in APRO have ties back to some of our 3-letter agencies or the DoD.
Well, I believe that now, based on some information that I shared with you last night. I didn't know that at the time. Again, I was just, as a kid at the time. I was in my early 20s, and I was just a newbie. I didn't know. I really, looking back on it now, there's so much that's obvious to me now, having worked in that type of community, but I didn't realize at the time. I met Jim's close friend, Colonel Wendell Stevens.
Oh wow, Wendell Stevens, interesting.
Oh yeah, Jim and Wendell were like brothers. Yeah. And Wendell told me that he had met Jim in the Air Force, and he told me, he says, we were both Blue Berets. And I had no idea what that meant at the time. I'm thinking like, oh, a Green Beret, this must be the Air Force's version of the Green Beret, special forces kind of thing. And I had no idea that this was, it was special forces, but to look into UFOs and stuff. And I knew Wendell had done that. He had spent time in Alaska, and he would debrief the missions that flew over close to Russia, and were taking all kinds of photographs and stuff. Although he wasn't allowed to look at the photographs of the UFOs they took, they went straight from the cameras into secured boxes and sent to Wright-Patterson. But he had quite a few interesting stories to tell. But yeah, and I remained friends with him well into the 80s. Coral, he did not have a good relationship with Coral. Coral was a beautiful lady. She was very frail even when I first met her, and she came to the office. She wasn't that old. She was very frail, and she either loved you or hated you. And she hated Wendell. Wendell wasn't even allowed into the house. I was there one time when Wendell came by to see Jim, and she would not. Jim wasn't there, and she would not let him in the house. And she had the same feelings about Alan Heineken, who tried to get APRO to kind of merge with them. I think that was in '77.
Yeah.
And she had an argument with Heineken out of the house. I was kind of started again.
Hey, Alan, really quick. I'm gonna go ahead and have a hand signal. When your audio is getting screwed up, I'm gonna go ahead and make a symbol to you of putting my hand up or something like this to let you know. Go ahead, but that we'll have that for the future going forward. Go ahead, my friend.
Okay. So anyway, one of my first big interviews was with everyone thought that I was like murdered by the force crew, or had some type of accident, and they were just believed the story they were telling, even though they went through several polygraphs and passed them. But then after 5 days, when he was found, I think it was in Snowflake, Arizona, he was hospitalized. And Coral arranged a telephone interview for me to conduct with Travis while he was still in the hospital. I was the first person to interview him, even before the sheriff's department, who had a conversation with him while they were driving, but I was the first formal interview. And to this day, his story has remained consistent, and nothing has changed. He had a very good memory of the incident, Jim arranged a number of psychiatrists, and James McDonald also met with Wendell at the time, and we all felt he was completely legitimate, and it was very, very important investigation. And we thought for certain at the time that this, given that all the witnesses had passed the polygraphs not once but twice, that this would be a groundbreaking investigation. Of course, it's remained significant, but it really didn't change the nature or promote disclosure at the time.
Right. Now, if I can, sorry for late bringing it up, these are Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who are the husband and wife team to go ahead and found APRO. Now, one thing to go ahead and say, which is amazing for this matter, we have Lou Elizondo, who's out there and really pushing disclosure forward. It's not Lou Elizondo on himself. It's Lou Elizondo and his wife, Jennifer Elizondo. The team make a dynamic that make it possible, and it's great to see we had that way back then as well.
Yes, and it's very interesting, and I really didn't realize this when I was working for APRO, but it's extremely significant that from they started during the 1952 flap out of Wisconsin, the 52 Washington D.C. flyover flap, and then they moved. We say they went to L.A., but they were only there a couple of weeks till they moved, till they got enlisted at Holloman Air Force Base. And
isn't that the same base where supposedly Eisenhower had meets with ETs at that time?
Exactly.
Wow.
And they were there from 54 to 1960, running APRO right out of the press office there at Holloman Air Force Base. And that's never addressed in anything that I've ever read about. I go like,
no,
there is no way in the world that the Air Force would allow you to use. They were literally printing the APRO monthly newsletters right there in the base press
What's
office.
the old saying, Alan? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Perhaps the whole reason that the Air Force had them there was because they were pulling in information that the Air Force wanted, but they wanted to have the understanding up front of what was going on. Because I would probably say all the stuff, if they're on the Air Force base, was probably bugged, logged, and everything else.
Oh, I think they were operating for the Air Force.
Oh, wow.
I actually believe they were the original ATIP. I don't think for a moment that they were just looking over their shoulders. There's no way in the world they would have permitted them to communicate with all these different countries, with scientists, in South America and the Far East and stuff, because all the mail that comes into the base is censored. And they're sending out newsletters to all over the world on Air Force postage.
But it's not just censored. All the mail that goes out of the base and into the base is logged, is looked into. So they're looking at every piece of documents that they send out and everything that comes back in, which gave the AFOSI the ability to go ahead and have complete insight into what they're going. Do we know if they had any funding besides the ability to have, free floor space on the Air Force base?
Well, they were enlisted. They were Air Force, personnel.
At that age?
So,
wow.
Yeah. Well, they weren't that old. They look older than they really are. I think they were only in their 40s there when they were working on the base. I'd have to look up the exact date. They passed away fairly young. I think Coral was only in her middle 60s when she died. I think it was 86. Jim had a bad heart. He had open heart surgery in 70. I want to say 77 or maybe early 78. But they weren't that old. And Wendell, he looked old at the time I knew him, and he was still going well, long after 1980. Did probably some of his best work after APRO folded. But I really believe that they were sponsored by the Air Force, because the only thing they had not a $6 a month membership fee for APRO. It was a $6 a year membership fee for APRO.
Yeah.
So they weren't making money. At their peak, they had 1,500 international members. So they weren't getting rich off of APRO. They had, I think, 8 books they published. But again, you know, back in that time, and even today, I mean, if you can, you're not, if you sell 100,000 books, you're Stephen King material, you know. So their books are still in print, but they weren't getting rich off of that. So I don't know where their funding came from, but it certainly leads me to believe that they were funded by some government agency.
Well, you're a husband and wife putting into this full time. You have your mortgage, you have your car, you have your overhead, what goes into it. And clearly they weren't getting enough money coming in from the subscription, so the money had to be coming from somewhere is kind of what you're getting to, and I completely agree.
Yeah, and they weren't in the Air Force long enough to have a substantial pension or anything like that, and they weren't of a retirement age when they opened in Arizona. But Tucson, people, again, today they wouldn't understand this, but back then, when they started in 1960, Tucson, Arizona was the hub really for the Cold War. We had Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, which was a SAC base. We had Hughes Aircraft, which was really the major arms manufacturer. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War. It was a hotbed for espionage. We were ringed by Titan ICBMs. And looking back at that time, I can see now why APRO would have wanted to situate themselves there. Also, it was a hotbed for UFO reports and sightings. And which leads me to my next major interview, which was with Sergeant Charles Mooney in 1975. Because this gets into the whole thing about UFOs and their association with sources of nuclear energy, like the Malmstrom ICBMs and others. Malmstrom wasn't the only base that had their missiles taken offline.
And I believe this is a picture of Sergeant Moody, right?
Yes, Sergeant Moody, who we'll discuss here what happened to him. Again, like always, Jim calls me. He says, "Hey, I want you to interview this guy, Sergeant Moody. He was abducted outside of Alamogordo, New Mexico. He has a very interesting case, and I want you to arrange an interview with him." He gave me his phone number, and I spoke to him. And unlike many abductees, maybe it's because he was military, he wasn't frightened at all. He had a partial memory loss immediately after the abduction, but it came back to him a couple of days later. He was had gone outside the city limits to watch a meteor shower, and this was at about 1:20 in the morning. And he's saying on the front of his Corvette when he sees what he thinks is a star, a meteor coming down, and suddenly it races in front of him, and there's this large, as he described it, metallic silver UFO in front of him. And he could see a window similar to what Betty and Barney Hill saw, and he saw silhouettes in the window. And before this all happened, within seconds before he can react, he said these guys came out of the UFO, grabbed him, 2 on each arm, and he thought, looking at them in the dark, that these were Chinese. That's what they appeared to him, and I can relate to that from my 79 incident. And so he did that by Chinese and something, and he was a little embarrassed because he said they were so strong, but they were very tiny. He was amazed how they overpowered him, and they dragged him on board the ship, and he was paralyzed. He couldn't move. They laid him on the floor, and the person he identified as the leader came over to him and communicated to him telepathically. Now, not all of them, and this is consistent with the interviews that I conducted. because everybody always says, oh, they're all telepathic. No, they're not. Only the leader communicated with him telepathically, and he had some kind of halo or something on his head, some type of apparatus on his head, and he was able to communicate with telepathically. And the leader said, hey, if I release you, you're not going to go crazy. You're going to behave yourself and not get violent. So Moody said to him verbally, yes, I'll behave myself. And so he released him, and they started to strike up a dialogue telepathically. And Moody's shared with me the thing which I really believe was most pertinent. Moody asked him, who are you? What are you doing here? What do you guys want? And the leader said, we're just like you. We're explorers, scientists, historians, doctors, and traders, just like you. And I thought, well, that answers a lot. It may not, be what everyone's looking for, but I go like, that makes perfect sense to me. And he said, the leader said to him, we just want to examine you, see what differences, in your physiology, what different from ours and stuff. So they gave him a medical examination, and they placed something in the back of his head at the base of his skull. And it created a wound. It was an implant of some type. And the leader said, you won't remember this, but he said later on, when you do remember, he says you should go to your own physician and get this checked out, make sure it's not infected, which again was like, that makes sense, makes perfect sense. And after they were done with the medical examination, Moody asked him, he says, how does this ship work? How does it make it fly? Now, I've seen one or two small articles about Moody's abduction online, and they're so whacked. They're conflating his abduction with Betty Andreessen's abduction, because they share in those tiny 2-paragraph articles that the engine that he saw had crystals and a spinning vortex. Now, that was Betty Andreessen. That's what she saw. What Moody saw was identical to what Bob Lazar would describe almost 2 decades later, 1989. And he described it identical to what Lazar said. He said what he was told is that the ships were propelled by anti-gravity, and he was shown these emitters, which he described as looking like 55-gallon drums hanging on PVC pipe, which is exactly what Bob Lazar said. And in fact, when I heard Lazar's first interview, I thought, I wonder if he had some inside knowledge about Moody's abduction. If in fact, he's not.
Was any of the information about Moody's abduction made public before that? They could have given Lazar the insight to that, or people who were feeding Lazar information?
No. In fact, most of the interviews that you saw in the newsletter were carefully tailored, and we didn't release a lot of critical details because just like a police investigation, we wanted to be able, if someone came to us and told us, hey, I saw this or I saw that, we wanted to make certain they were telling the truth. So we held stuff back. So in fact, Moody's abduction really didn't have much publicity at all. It was never on any major news site. It didn't. It was mentioned briefly in one of the APRO newsletters, but nothing like Travis Walton's, nothing like the Betty Hill abduction. And a lot of what Betty and Barney experienced, we also held back. So there was no way, unless Bob had some inside knowledge, that he would know that. But I totally believe Bob. I do know some things, they're critical of his education, but I do know that he did have those, his education does check out. He's just not telling everything because it would get some people in trouble, because everybody he names by name, they get in trouble. So he just doesn't share everything, but his background does check out.
Yeah.
So So Moody, I continued to conduct interviews with him. I conducted 3 telephone interviews. And the 4th attempt that I made to interview with him, I got the base operator, and she told me, oh, he's been transferred. I said, transferred? He didn't tell me he was going to be transferred someplace. Oh, well, he's been transferred. I said, well, where to? She says, I can't tell you.
It's classified.
I go, well, why not? He says, I just can't tell you. And that was it. And he disappeared. Never heard anything about what happened to him or where he was sent. And to this day, I've looked for him on the internet. I've done some missing person searches in my career, and found even people that had given up children for adoption. But I've never found out what happened to him.
You know, if I can interrupt for 1 second here, Mike Morris, you were bringing up before that Alan had interviewed. Was it Travis Walton? Was that correct, Mike?
Yes, I think he covered a little bit, Alan. You were saying that you were the first one to see him in the hospital, even prior to the Enquirer selling his story to them. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
What was his physical condition like?
Which is
Alan?
huge.
You really didn't describe it.
He was emaciated. I mean, he looked like someone who'd been through hell. I mean, he definitely needed to be hospitalized. He was dehydrated. He'd lost quite a bit of weight. And, you know, it was amazing that he was as lucid as he was, given his conditions. I can tell you what, having grown up in Arizona, there is no way in the world he was out in that forest for 5 days. He would have died. He would have died overnight. And that is very common, people to get lost either in the forested areas there in the north where he was, or even where I lived in Southern California, not Southern California, but Southern Arizona, in the Catalina range. You're not going to survive overnight. You're not. The temperatures, people don't understand. They think of Arizona as a very warm place, but there's a 60-degree temperature.
It's hot during the day, freezing at night. So if you're going to be out there during the night, you need to find some way to keep yourself warm. But during the daytime, you have to find out some way to keep yourself cool. So for you're saying the amount of time he was gone and missing, even though he was emaciated, he would have been dead in that situation if they would have found him.
He would have never survived 5 days. There's no way. It was so common for people to die in the mountains or the lowlands there in Arizona. It was like a monthly occurrence. You know, people would go out hiking and they'd disappear and they'd find their body months later. You had to know really what you're doing. I hike quite a bit all around Arizona, and you definitely need to take water and food and dress appropriately. There was no way he survived out there 5 days by himself. He would have died. So, but he shared the whole story with him. They did try to later on, and Jim was present I was not present at this hypnosis session, but they did try to put him under regressive hypnosis. He didn't reveal anything new. You know, what he shared was pretty much what he had shared with me during that first interview. And like I said, he's never changed his story since. It was rock solid. And what he described was very pertinent to me. I think, and I've heard him say this since then, that what happened to him at the site when he was struck in the chest, what something I shared with him at the time, what seemed to me is up there where they were cutting down the wood and stuff, they were cutting it down because it gets very dry up there and they want to cut down the underbrush so you don't get any sparks from lightning and cause forest fires. So they clear that out. But if you have an aircraft traveling through that dry air, it builds up a very strong electrical charge. Private planes that fly in Arizona, they have like a chain that when they land, it grounds the plane so it doesn't have that electrical discharge, because if it didn't, you'd go up to that plane and it would discharge on you and literally kill you. It built up that large of a static charge. I think what happened when he rose up from where he was hiding, he just got close enough to that craft that it discharged on him. And that light that they saw, and it knocked him unconscious. It's like it didn't kill him. And I think they brought him on board to either restart his heart or first aid. And he had to have remained with them for the full 5 days, because the last thing he remembers seeing when he awoke after the incident was the craft taking off above him on the roadway. And then he made it, he was in Snowflake where he made his first phone call. So he, after his initial examination by the aides on board, and they had left the room because he become violent, jumped off the table and grabbed what he thought was something he could fend himself with. They tried to break it. It was like a glass funnel or something. It wouldn't break, but they backed out of the room. And then later, some what he described as what's described today as like an Aryan-looking being, very beautiful, long blonde hair, but it had like a bubble helmet. He thought these must be NASA people or something. And I think actually what happened, because there were 3 of them, that this was a projection by the Greys, that they were projecting an image in his head that he would be, you know, frightened of. I don't, that's speculation on my part, but I do know they can manipulate your thoughts. And I think that's what happened. And they got him back on the table, anesthetized him, and the next thing he woke up, you know, on the roadway. Of course, he also described that he had wandered the ship a little bit and came into a room where it was like an observatory, basically. And it was a tiny chair, and it had like a control lever in it. And he pushed the lever, and the stars violently shifted. I think that was some type of control for the ship that he was in. And that's when the human-looking alien came in and got him and walked him out. He never, that human-looking alien never spoke to him, never communicated with him telepathically either. So I think they were just projecting an image that those were actually the Greys. Later on, I had other interviews of significance, Betty and Barney Hill, Betty Andreessen. I did that investigation with Ray Fowler. And just to show you, people think, oh, it's just an investigation, there's not much to it. Oh, no, it's that investigation file. We had over 600 pages. When we investigated somebody, we would do a police background check on them. We would talk to their family. We would talk to employers if we could. We'd talk to neighbors. And it was just like doing a police interview if you were, you know, investigating someone for a crime. And it allowed us that we.
Hold on a second, Alan. You were in a point of network issues again. Just hold on for a second. I think we'll get it clear in a second.
Sure.
All right, go ahead and try again.
Sure.
No, it's still, we got an issue.
Okay.
We'll figure it out. We'll get there. Give it a second again. Yeah, there's a lot of solar, you know, we're getting towards the peak of the solar cycle right now. And there's been a bunch of X-rated flares that have been coming off the sun, and it's been screwing with all the networks from Microsoft to Google to Apple to you name it. So let's try it again. Here you go, Alan. Go ahead.
Okay, I was sharing about the Betty Andreessen investigation, and as I said, the investigations weren't, I think, like MUFON now, they have like a questionnaire they fill out. We had a 600-page investigation file on Betty. When we interviewed somebody like Moody or Betty Hill or Travis and stuff, we didn't just interview them. We interviewed their family, their friends, their neighbors, their employers, if we were permitted. We'd get police background checks on them. We'd get medical records, employment records. We even looked into their economics. So we had lengthy files. We go as far as we could to thoroughly vet them as if we were investigating them for a crime. So they weren't just tangential interviews. They were very lengthy interviews. Ray was also an Air Force officer. He held the same specialty as Jim did. And Ray and Jim were very good friends. Jim was also a friend of Leonard Springfield, who wrote the definitive book on UFO retrievals, and they were constantly communicating with Leonard was constantly communicating with APRO while he wrote his book that was released in 1977 about retrievals, where he catalogs about 119 UFO retrievals. Although we're not certain that they were actually 119, some of them may have been reports about the same retrieval just from different people that were involved. But so it was a very close network of people, and we did very in-depth investigations where these things were concerned. Well, this gets me into, I've been working with APRO for quite a long time. I did very little really the type of work that I thought I would be doing, the artwork or anything. I just become a full-time investigator, basically. And Jim would either call me or stop by, spur of the moment, just get a knock at the door. It was Jim, and he'd say, hey, do this or do that. And again, now I know why he did that and didn't just call me up. Again, from an intelligence perspective, you don't do that. You don't call people if you don't have to. He was close enough, he would just come over. And everything was done verbally. Nothing was written down. So this gets into leading into 1978, into the spring of 1978. And Jim says, hey, I've been contacted by some people who want to open up a UFO museum.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's going to be in Tucson, because, a lot of museums in Tucson. I thought it was going to be in Tucson. And he goes like, no. He says, it's going to be in Minneapolis.
Yep.
They're renting the top floor, the IDS center there. Now, that was like if you were to say, I'm going to rent the top floor of the Trade Center in New York. I mean, that was no small thing. I go, and I literally was incredulous. I said, really? They're renting that entire top floor? He says, yeah, it's like 6,000 square feet, and it's going to be a permanent UFO museum there. And I thought, like, really? In Minneapolis? I thought, not like a UFO capital. I could see Los Angeles or maybe New York, but
Minneapolis? You had to ask the question. Why like, Minneapolis?
Really? Yeah, I thought, okay, that's fine. And he says, we want you to be like the art director and do the exhibits and stuff. And they're going to open in November. And he tasked me with a few beginning things, put a few things together. And basically, one was the Bill Herman investigation, which is another prominent investigation. That was one I worked on with Wendell Stevens. It's a very significant investigation that, again, it's kind of been lost to history, but it's a very big one. And
yeah,
really
there have been a lot of people trying to find the archives of Wendell Stevens, but it seems like it's a lot more difficult. And there's people that may have the information, that may not have the info. Any thoughts on whether Wendell's archives are out there for anybody to get access to?
Oh, I do know where they are. They're in Europe. I'll have to look up, but he donated his photographic library to an institute in Europe. I'll look it up and I'll get you the exact.
Yeah, thank you very much. That'd be great, because I know there's some people who have been looking for this information. We've talked about Wendell Stevens many times on the show in the past, and it's great to hear someone else who's actually been in that same tranche of information. And the only way sometimes you can get there is by expanding the network, and that'll be wonderful, Alan.
Yeah, Wendell had the largest collection of UFO photographs, and people are all saying, "Oh, there's no good photographs." Oh, they just haven't. They haven't looked very hard. I mean, he had two actual tintypes that were taken in 1901 by a 90-year-old man who was on his way to his great-granddaughter's birthday party. And these were original tintypes. They weren't photographs of a tintype. They were actual tintypes of a cigar-shaped UFO.
Wow.
Flying. At first, it's in front of this plateau, and then it's the second picture, because this was an old, where you pull the thing out and need light exposure and stuff. So he was able to get two shots off And the second shot is of it turning into a cloud. And this thing had to be enormous, given the perspective of the plateau it was near. And there was nothing like that at that time. You know, it wasn't a Zeppelin or anything like that. It looked like a flying oil tanker, featureless, completely smooth, and no one had seen or heard of anything like that at that time. But he had many other photographs, many from Asia, particularly Japan, because particularly in the 70s, the Japanese, there was a Japanese citizen that didn't walk around with a camera around their neck. And they had the best cameras in the world, and they were always taking pictures. He had another collect of a very prominent mass sighting over Manhattan of a UFO that was taken from several vantage points, which I've never seen published. Excellent photograph, but he had hundreds of them. And when he used to do his lectures, and you can find a lot of his lectures online. There's one that actually you can hear him, because I was operating the camera equipment. You can hear him call to me, Alan, you know, you got that slide ready. But he used to do his lectures and show his portfolio, and excellent photographs. Well, anyway, so I'm preparing these, you know, I'm going to do sculptures and different things. And he's telling me what to do, and sending it off to Minneapolis. And the museum opened on time on November 15th. Was actually the same day back in 74 when I interviewed Travis, was November 15th. Just a coincidence, I imagine, but that's when the museum opened. And went off without a hitch. I still have the press release from the opening. And I thought, again, that's, you know, strange to open a permanent museum there, but what the hell, I'm happy to be a part of it. So we go through Thanksgiving and Christmas, no big deals. And then after New Year's, Jim shows up, and we're now into 79, January 79. Jim shows up, and he first asked me, he says, you know, what do you think of the museum? You know, they treating you right? And I go, yeah, you know, it's fine. He says, well, we got some more projects for you. And he first asked me, because I already knew he had his heart surgery. And he says, you know, Coral and I are looking for someone to take over APRO after, you know, we're gone. And we don't really have anyone. Now I'm thinking, the only person I ever met in the office, besides we had a permanent secretary there. And if you look at any of their books, they have all these associates, you know. The only person I ever met there was, besides Window, was James McDonald. Everything was done either through the mail or over the phone. And he always had someone manning the phone 24/7. When the office closed, the phones went to their home. So there was always someone to pick up the phone. And Jim spent every day during the week, and the secretary had her days off a couple of days when he was there. And so they recovered 7 days a week, even on the weekends. And he says, we're looking for someone to take over when we're gone. Would you be interested? And I said, oh, yeah, I'd be honored. Because we talked a lot about, I had ideas about approaching, then we were just getting into the computer age, really. I was talking about using the University of Arizona computers to create a database and correlate some of the information we had in radar data and stuff, and just actually make everything more scientific. And he was impressed by that, and some of the different things I want. So I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. So okay. And he was a man of few words, so that was the end of that. And he just said, thank you. Okay. And he left. Well, a couple of days later, he showed up. It was in the evening, I recall it. And I was, oh, hi, how you doing? He came in, and he sat on the sofa with me. He says, I want to talk to you about something. And I said, okay. And I thought it was going to be about the museum, and it kind of was. He says, I want to share something with you that's coming up. He says, all those exhibits of the museum are going to be moved. And I said, oh, really? And I thought, that didn't last long. I thought, you know, they're already, you know, belly up or something. And I said, oh, the museum's not doing well. He goes like, no. He says, not that. He says, the government, and that's how he put it, wants to reveal the history of UFOs in relation to the government, the Air Force, and NASA. Now, like I said, this is now in 79. It was January, would have been February at this point. And although you would think someone would be shocked by that, the hubbub at that time, the buzz was that there was going to be a reveal. We didn't call it disclosure at the time. We said it was going to just come out. It was going to be a big reveal. And my first impression was, wow, it's about time. I expected something like this, and he said, what they're going to do is they're going to take all those exhibits. And I found it humorous at the time. They're going to take all those exhibits. And he says, you're familiar with the bicentennial train. I go like, oh my God, the bicentennial train. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Now, again, to get perspective, because this is not a big deal today, but back then there were only 3 national networks on TV besides public, broadcasting. And the only newspapers you read was the newspaper in your hometown. So there was no major communication or anything. And when the bicentennial came around, the government thought, hey, we want to popularize, make people proud. We're going to take the Constitution, Bill of Rights. We're going to put on train with all these historical artifacts from the Smithsonian's, and we're going to travel all so everyone can share in, celebrate the bicentennial and see what they're fighting for. And really at the time, it wasn't like today where you just hop on a plane and go to Washington and see the Constitution. There are people that at that time that would never have an opportunity to go to Washington and see these documents and see these historical artifacts. So it made perfect sense to send this train around like a traveling museum, and everyone would get an opportunity to see it. And I went to the museum, to the bicentennial train when it was in Tucson, and went through the exhibits and stuff. And everybody did. It was the big ticket at the time. So when he said, we want to take and put all these exhibits on the refitted bicentennial train, again, I thought myself, it seemed kind of lame to me, but I thought, well, okay, I get it. It's fine. And I said, well, what else is going to be on there besides the exhibits? And he said, well, they're going to have some real artifacts. I said, you mean like the Roswell spaceship and bodies and stuff? And he goes, yes, specifically.
Wow.
And
this is during the Carter administration, who supposedly Carter got a reveal of what the non-human intelligence was, and it hit him hard, where members of his staff saw him sobbing in his hands because he found out he got the information that he wanted, not necessarily the answer he wanted.
I have a different take on this, because I did meet Carter 4 times, and he was not a man to sob. Yeah, absolutely. He might have been really mad and been teary-eyed because he was so angry, but I don't think he was sobbing because he got bad news. This is the take I have on. A lot of people don't realize this, because they all referred to him as a peanut farmer, and he's rated as not a very good president and stuff. And
no, he was he was a great president, because if you look at the time that we had hostages that were in Iran, he didn't leave the White House, he didn't go on vacation, didn't go anywhere, and every single day that we had people who were captive somewhere, he was going to do what it took to get to that point. And the reality is, we would have gotten our hostages out of Iran sooner if there wasn't a deal from the upcoming Reagan administration to go ahead and allow them to come out after Reagan took the presidency. So, if anything, it's more of a political play by the CIA than the work that Jimmy did at the time. He was, from my eyes, look at what he did as a president, but afterwards, he's an amazing gentleman.
I having lived through those times, again, I have a little bit different take. And John Chambers, who was part of the extraction from the Canadian embassy, I didn't know he was a CIA asset at the time. He was a makeup artist like I was. I was a good friend of his, and we communicated. And at the time he was doing this in Canada, he told me he was up there. He actually sent me pictures, which I still have, that he was up there working on a project for a Canadian museum, making this giant King Kong exhibit. And actually, he was working at the Canadian embassy with the CIA, extracting the people from the Canadian embassy that had been taken hostage, right. Which is the movie that Ben Affleck worked on. And the daughter of our agricultural ambassador worked for me. She was one of my set artists, painter, Pam. And when the hostages were taken, Pam started crying. She was very sensitive. And I thought, oh, it's Pam being Pam. And I said, don't worry, Pam. I said, we'll have the Marines in there any minute and they'll get them out. She goes, it's not that. She says, my dad is the agricultural ambassador there. And he's one people have been taken hostage. So there was all these connections that I didn't even know about. But in regards to Carter, I could say definitely the press wasn't very friendly and people were very upset about how things turned out with the hostages at the time. But that aside, because I'm sure there were a lot of things in the background that like that at a time which I wasn't aware of, but his intelligence was greatly underestimated in that he was a nuclear engineer and he didn't just help, he designed the nuclear reactor for the Nautilus.
Jimmy Carter did?
Yeah, Jimmy
Holy
Carter did.
Shit.
He was
I have personally, you know, I was a little kid during that age. I remember what was going on. I was probably in 5th or 6th grade when all that stuff kind of took. No, I was in 6th or 7th grade. I think 6th grade when all that stuff was going on. And I remember a lot of it, but I didn't know that, Alan. That's amazing factual information.
This was in the late, when he designed the reactor. This was in the late 50s. He worked under Rickenbacker at the Department of Energy. And I believe that's when he first learned of non-human intelligence. I guarantee you, well, we suspected, and Danny Sheehan's alluded to this, and I've met Danny, that the Department of Energy, which has a higher classification than even the Joint Chiefs, is where a lot of these at least some, maybe the propulsion equipment is housed. And I guarantee that Carter would have had access to that propulsion system to at least look at, say, hey, does this give you any ideas? I believe it was 59 when he did that. And later on in the late 60s, the Nautilus was refitted. Are you still getting?
We're good. We got you.
Yeah. In the late 60s, the Nautilus was refitted, according to one of the submariners who worked on there, to help retrieve USOs. And it was the Nautilus that was in the vicinity of the Shag Harbor incident. And we only know from the documents the submarine responded to that incident. And the only submarine working in the North Atlantic at that time was the Nautilus. And it had already been refitted at that time with a watertight compartment where they could open up, send divers out, and retrieve things. So I believe Carter learned at that time, back in the 50s, about a non-human intelligence. And then he was briefed by George Bush Sr., who I've also met, who's very nice.
Wasn't George Bush Sr. the head of the CIA?
He was the head of the CIA at that time. And I think
which meant he had a full understanding of what was going on, considering the CIA's involvement in the cover-up and the program.
Yes, and I think what Carter wanted to do, because the Nixon administration wanted to do this before Carter. And I think when Nixon briefed Carter as he left, because he still briefed, he was still briefing the income, although he resigned, he was a part of the Carter's briefing that he shared, and Carter knew of this non-human intelligence. And Nixon said, hey, yeah, I wanted to do it, but they wouldn't let me. They pulled the Emaneker film footage from Holloman, and you didn't do it because Nixon wanted to, after the moon landing, he wanted to do something that would beat the moon landing. So he wanted to do a reveal himself, but, there was Watergate.
And there's actually been
gone.
talk about Nixon's UFO papers that were hidden in the White House and should have been, if you want to call it, brought forth to our last president of the United States, number 45, Donald Trump, when he was in there. But we never heard anything about it. Granted, there was a lot of talk going on that at the end of the Trump administration, they got the information and they were trying to get it out, but there wasn't enough time to get it through the declassification process.
Well, I think what happened with Carter, this incident where they said he was crying at his desk, I think what happened is that Bush Sr., who was running the CIA at the time, told, hey, look, if this comes out, you know, share with them, hey, we didn't share this information legitimately with these, like these different industries that are being talked about. I won't name them, but you know, the regular military industrial complex. We didn't legitimately give, we just gave it to them on the sly. Everyone's going to sue our rear ends when this comes out, and it'll just be a catastrophe. You know, it'll hurt the stock market, it'll hurt this and that and everything. And, you know, we got this thing going on in Iran, and we just don't need all this trouble. And
it's the same thing we're dealing with today, Alan. If you would agree or disagree on this one, they keep on finding all these reasons we can't bring it out because of this or that or that. There's going to be a change over here. Yeah. It's going to affect religion. People aren't going to listen to us. Our governments are going to crumble. But
well, Hal Puthoff shared, and I wrote a post on Richard's site concerning this. People can go to Richard Dolan members only site and read my post about Hal Puthoff's statement at the Seoul conference. And it was the same old thing. Apparently they met in the early 2000s to discuss possibly going to disclosure. And you can listen to Hal's lecture online. It's on. Yeah. And I think they literally looked at what I referred to in my post as all their sins, and they go like, no, we're not gonna do it. I mean, it'd just be hell. They'd be coming after us with their pitchforks and primitive weapons, you know.
Yeah.
It would just.
But the thing is, comes down to as well. Depending on the information that's coming forward, the American people said, you've been lying to us for today 77 years. Screw you guys. Yeah. We're going to run you out of, we're going to redo this government because of the lies and the perpetual lies and the cover-up that's been going on since before 1947.
Yeah, it's of all the conspiracy theories, the UFO phenomenon is the biggest one. And if that one's busted open, it's a cascade. Well, what about Kennedy? What about this? What about that? So it's and I think what happened is when Bush said no to Carter, we're not going to release it, we can't. He was just so angry, he was just teary-eyed because, like I said, I know him. He had and it's no disrespect, and I know he's in hospice now. But unlike my dad and a lot of people that have been hospice for weeks, maybe a month, he's been in hospice for a year.
Yeah, over a year.
Yeah, he was a very, I'd say, ornery. It would be in a nice term. He was not pleasant. I met Nixon, was the first president I met. I met Ford, Bush the elder. I was part of the 9/11 investigation. I met Dick Cheney. I actually got an award from Vice President Cheney for my work during that investigation, which lasted 8 months. And so I met them all. Both Bush the elder and Nixon were both the nicest people I ever met.
Quick question.
Gerald.
About the 9/11 thing, you were involved in the investigation. Did they bring remote viewers in to look at what happened at the very bottom of the thing? There's been some rumors out there that remote viewers were leveraged to try and figure out what happened, what was going on with the structural integrity at the bottom.
Not to my knowledge. That's a whole nother story.
Oh, yeah.
What happened in the lead up? When I returned to the Bay Area, no, we finally made an arrest in 2004 of the actual mastermind, and I'm not disclosing anything confidentially because it's open source now. The actual mastermind wasn't Sheikh Mohammed; he was one of the executioners. The actual mastermind was Ali Muhammad, who's now in Colorado Max. We arrested him in 2004. He was in living here in the Bay Area. He had 24 different aliases. He was actually the mastermind and assassin of Anwar Sadat. Wow. And he tried to turn himself over to the CIA, and they said, no, we don't want any part of you. And they warned at the time, there was no Homeland Security at that time, so they told Customs Enforcement, hey, watch for this guy. He might try and sneak into the United States. And he did. And he had a sham marriage in San Jose. He became a IT guy. He actually joined the U.S. military and became a Green Beret. Now, he wasn't a special operator. He was working in purchasing, which might be even more advantageous. But he brought Anwar al-Sawiri to the Bay Area and raised $3.5 million for the first 9/11 attack when they used the van to blow up they put it in the parking lot and blew it up. That was the first attempt. And while he was a Green Beret on his furloughs, he was going to Afghanistan to fight with the Mujahideen, and that's where he met bin Laden. But it was Ali Muhammad who was the actual mastermind. And when I was brought there to Washington, D.C., the first place I was brought, because there's people to go like, oh, you know, it wasn't a plane, it was a false flag. Well, if it was a false flag, I spent 8 months investigating some false flag. They should have told me, you know. But we had principles. We deported bin Laden's brother like within hours after we got there. He was, we know he was part of the conspiracy. He had met with a British asset, another jihadist the night before, and he left. He was staying at a particular place we know of. In fact, I have video photographs of him there. He left like 20 minutes before the attack. And I had officers that worked for me who were rescuing people from the Pentagon because they were stationed right across from the Pentagon. And when I arrived there on the 18th. They wanted me out there the same day of the attack. And the FBI taking all the cars. There were no planes flying. There was no way for me to get there. But they finally arranged a plane flight. I was met by FBI at Reagan's International, then quickly briefed, and I was taken right to the Pentagon. And it was still smoldering. You could still smell the jet fuel. And I don't care that people say there were parts of that plane still embedded there. The FAA, their flight investigators, had not. What they do is they take all the plane parts, what's left of them, and try and reassemble the plane and look for if it, you know, was it an interior explosion or exterior? Was it hit by something, whatever? And it had been burning for days. I mean, like I said, and you could still smell the jet fuel on the 18th. And again, if this was some false flag or something, we sure worked our asses off trying to, you know, find people, which we did, and arrested people and conducted the investigation and backlog where the mistakes were made. And when I did return to the Bay Area, I implored, after we arrested Ali Muhammad, I implored the people I was working jointly with in the private sector. I was never, although I did go through an FBI academy, it was the civilian equivalent. And I implored the people I was working with at the FBI to let me brief some of the VIPs within San Francisco about what happened and everything, because they weren't taking it seriously, from the politicians to the nonprofits to the tech people. They weren't taking it seriously. They were acting like 9/11 occurred at another planet, but it wasn't. I mean, it was, they came, what people don't realize is the plane that was taken down by the passengers over Philadelphia, that was headed for the Bank of America in San Francisco. And I've seen the intelligence that was retrieved from Sheikh Mohammed's arrest by MI6. And it was a telephone book of intel they had done for 3 years. They had people stationed outside the Bank of America there. And they had pictures of the bank people's kids, They had people working inside the bank and everything. There was no false flag. These were jihadists. They don't. I guarantee they don't think like you and me. And that, again, that's another subject. But just to lend some legitimacy to that and my experience, I was actually when Tom Ridge became the head of Homeland Security, I was in charge of his protection detail where he was staying at that time. And so I saw Tom Ridge every day. Senator Harry Reid was also staying in the same complex. He was kind of a strange duck, having been in his townhouse. There was two things in it: a bed and an easy chair, and that was it. There was nothing else. I think all Harry did was he'd get back from, the Senate and go to bed. That was it. There wasn't even a TV in that place. So it was kind of strange. But anyhow, so Jim tells me they've got this plan to have a bicentennial train. It's going to travel all over the country, big reveal, share that, aliens are real. Here's their spaceship. Here's their bodies, blah, blah, blah. This whole thing was going to come down. And that leads me to March. I believe it was March 18th, night of March 18th. And I remember this so clearly. It's something you never forget, different events like 9/11, stuff that you are just brazened in your mind. And my wife was, she was great. She was very dutiful in getting me to bed, because I'm one of these people, I'll stay up, as you know, from my text, I'm up all night, texting and doing different things and working on projects. And she was very dutiful about getting me to bed every night. We would watch George Burns and Gracie Allen at 10 o'clock on Channel 11. And at 10:30, when it was over, she'd get up, turn off the TV, grab me by the arm, and take me to bed. And she was a very sound sleeper. And I know I'm interviews a lot of abductees and stuff. They'll say, hey, I tried to wake my partner up or someone when they were full asleep and I couldn't wake them up. That wasn't sure. If she fell asleep in a car, you could wake her up. She was just a very sound sleeper. And so that's something I want to know. When she would hit the bed, bang, she was out. I was not like that at all. I'd be awake for at least an hour. So anyhow, we went to bed.
So we're basically up in 1979 when you have that.
This is March 18th, 1979.
Yes.
Friday night, I believe.
With the cat lady who lived nearby.
Yes. I don't know why, but I'm somewhat sensitive that we lived in a trailer, because like today people think of like crappy little old trailer park, kind of thing. But no, this is a beautiful double wide trailer. I mean, it was.
I have to say really quick today, you know what the fad is for a lot of the younger people? To go ahead and take shipping containers and turn them into basically trailer homes at this point. So people are saying, let's go ahead and, yes, trailer homes are bad. No, there's a lot of trailer homes and trailer parks that are out there for different people at different stages in their life who want different types of places to live. And just to say because you're in a trailer park or something, it's not nice. Thank you for bringing that up, Alan, because it's very important for a lot of people out there to understand.
Yeah, and it was very common. There were dozens and dozens of trailer parks in Tucson at the time. It was not considered, an unusual lifestyle or anything. We had double wide, but there were even triple wides.
Yep.
And if you woke up inside our place, you would think you were in a regular house.
Yeah.
You would have no idea you were in a trailer. It was 2 bedrooms and very nicely furnished. And my wife, and this is important to the story, had made large ceiling to floor drapes for the living room that covered all 3 of the picture windows in that living room from ceiling to floor. Anyhow, she took me to bed. I'm laying there, and as you shared, to the south of us was a tiny trailer, little Airstream silver trailer, more like a camper than a trailer. It was so tiny. There was a cat lady that lived there, and she must have been in her 80s, and I would see her outside sitting with the cats, like 30 or so cats. She was all very nice. I never had a conversation with her, but she would smile and wave at me when I'd come and go. And At sunset, she would go inside with half the cats and, close her door. And about 3 or 4 times a week, the cats knew when we turned off our lights, they knew, we were in bed or something, but they knew they could jump on the roof. And
uh-oh. Alan? The cats jumped on the roof and killed his internet signal. Alan, are you there? Well, Mike.
Yeah, could be a
Morris.
solar flare, Thomas.
Solar flare issues. It could be that. Could be an issue with his phone. He might be able to dial back in. But this is where we're getting to the good part. Back in 1979, when he had his second, if you want to call it, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, Thomas, this story is very interesting because this is, where he decides he needs a break from the UFO subject that he's been putting forth to us in such detail, which is very critical. I mean, some of the information he's giving out tonight has heretofore not been known by most of our community, I think. That President Carter actually wanted to stand up, get the bicentennial train out there and tell the American people, yes, they have been here.
Yeah.
And he was going to have a whole historical train of artifacts and different renderings that Alan worked on, and some of actual recoveries, as I understand it, along with bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was in the works. It just, timing, who knows, but, it just didn't come to pass, which is terrible in and of itself, because at least there was one president that was willing to go that far. I mean, they had the museum up, it was running, then they were ready to get the train and go from there.
It's one of those things we have to go ahead and look at, Michael, and understand with the situation that he was going through. Carter had the, if you want to call it, the wanting to bring it forward, but we have to wonder who kept him from bringing it forward.
And one other thing, Thomas, when Alan can rejoin us here, I want him to revisit Holloman one more time, because I think that's very important, because it ties back into what Thomas Whitmore was talking about, which was the agreements that were signed that day. And he has knowledge, I'm talking about Alan. Alan has knowledge that those documents, so forth, that the craft that came in and landed and so forth, there's footage of that. We all knew that. Supposedly wound up in some famous film. But the key thing is that they have the film, that they actually passed it on to NBC. Alan knows the producer that was going to actually air it back then. So I think that's very interesting that back in the 70s, it was a hotbed for UFO disclosure, unlike today, where everybody's throwing cold water.
I'll give you the exact information.
It's
paste in your text message.
A strange phenomenon that back in the 70s, we were in a go mode, but then suddenly the brakes were put on. Was it because the election was coming up in 1980? I'm not sure. Was it, due to our hostages in the Middle East?
7621.
I'm not sure.
And then you can dial in with PIN.
Whatever, something exteriorly put the brakes on that discovery, which would have been very important. So to that extent, I think we missed a big
106
important moment in our country's history to actually make a disclosure to the American people.
And the number you need to dial is area code.
Today we're hoping that it's on the horizon. And to that extent,
316.
We have David Grush and Tim Burchett and everybody else out there to thank. But
762.
I hope we can revisit that with Alan. I hope he can get back on, because the fact that somebody had given the go sign. This is from the Nixon administration. This is not from the Carter administration.
Yes, sir.
That correct. NBC had gotten the go, and they actually had a title. It was called UFOs.
Thank you, sir.
It Has Begun. And supposedly, according to Alan now, David Grush has confirmed that there's the film of the meeting and that it still exists. out there of the famous landing at Holloman with Eisenhower. So imagine if we could all view that and find out what really happened. We all know what allegedly happened, but to actually have it confirmed with video, I think would be of tremendous value.
Yeah.
Sorry, Thomas. Go
Now,
ahead.
Alan is going to be calling in. I just talked with him. We do have a phone call-in number. There's a PIN number that he can go ahead and join in. And I've just talked to him. If you heard the PIN number, what's going on, that's fine. If people heard of this situation, it's just a regular dial-in number for the back end. And I think there we go. We have Alan coming in. On that note, let me put up his picture here. See what we can do with it. Alan, are you with us, my friend? Alan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We got you, my friend. Go ahead. We got you. Can you hear me, Alan? Alan?
Yes, can you hear me?
We got you, Alan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
All right. So we were just talking about back in 1979 about the cat lady and everything that was going on. And then the lights went out. The cats knew to come and run all over the roof because they could get out there and do it. And then something amazing happened.
Yeah, that would happen like 3 or 4 times a week, and it just infuriated me. And we had just literally lied down when I heard them bang, on the roof, and the adrenaline just flowed through the damn cats, and they were fighting and screaming, and it just pounding on the roof. Yeah, it was always bad. And so what I would do commonly is I'd jump up, I'd go out to the kitchen, to the pantry, get the broom, and I'd take the bristle end and smack it on the kitchen ceiling, which was a wood ceiling, and to chase them off. And that would normally scare them, and they'd chase off, and that was it. So that's what I was going to do. I jump up, go in there, get the broom, and I'm smacking it, on the ceiling of the kitchen. And while I'm doing that, I noticed that those full-length drapes in the living room are all lit up. Now, that wasn't as unusual as you would think, in that normally that indicated that there was someone parked in the driveway. Back then, there was no GPS or anything, and there was a tiny light at the entrance to the trailer court where people could actually pull over and, see inside their car if they were looking at a map. Or it meant there was a friend of my wife, another young lady who lived in her father owned the trailer court, and she had her own little bungalow that was very close by, and she would get dropped off there at the entrance. So I thought it must be her. But so I didn't pay any attention to the lights. I just kept smacking the ceiling until the cats jumped off. I thought, oh, good, they're done. I'll go back to bed. So I went back, lay down again, and again, I just literally pulled the covers over, and bang! It startled me so bad. They're back over, squalling and yelling and fighting. Oh, I was even angrier. Again, just totally full of adrenaline. And my wife is sound asleep. She doesn't even notice. She knows I'm getting out of bed or anything. So I jump up and go back in the pantry, grab the broom again. I'm smacking against the ceiling. And this time I'm so angry. I'm going to get them off the roof for good this time. And so I spin the broom around to the wood handle part, and I'm going to smack the wood handle part against the ceiling. Now, I knew if I did this, it could damage the ceiling. I might dent the ceiling. So I kind of pull him back, not hitting it hard, thinking it'll be fine. But I'm just so angry. So I'm smacking it, and the cats, they're squalling, and finally they jump off. Well, I noticed the light is still on there, shining through the drapes. So I thought, well, I'll just go out there, take a peek, and see if there's someone in the driveway. So I go to the drape next to the front door, and I peek out to the north where the entrance to the driveway is. And to my surprise, there's nothing there. And I go like, well, where's that light coming from? So I turn my head to look to the south, And that's when I see what I can only describe as a landing craft. Now, it was egg-shaped, about as large as a Volkswagen Bug, and it was sitting on these 4 spindly legs. Now, having worked at APRO from 74 to this point, 1979, I had never heard of anything that looked like this. Now, since that time, I've heard several that confirmed for me, because I'd never heard it before, that confirmed for me that, in fact, these things do exist. But at that time, this is the first time I've ever seen or heard anything about anything like this. So I'm just dumbfounded. I'm looking at this thing. And I would say it was white, but it was glowing, again, a blue lavender glow just enveloped the entire thing. And it was bright enough that it illuminated the entire area. And in the doorway, this wasn't a beam. It looked very mechanical to me. And the best way I can describe it, I don't know if you're showing that picture.
Yep, we're showing it right now, my friend.
Yeah, and this is exactly what it looked like. It looked like Gumpy with a human head. It literally is what it looked like. And,
which is interesting because basically what we're talking about here is a different type of craft and potentially a different kind of non-human intelligence. And that's one thing that we've heard from many people saying there's at least 5 different species that are here. And what you're talking about here is yet another species. Very interesting, Alan.
Well, given its movement, my impression was this was mechanical. That it was an android or a robot of some type, that it wasn't alive. It had no eyes, no features in the face. It had a human-shaped head, but no visual features. But it was looking in my direction, and it had no fingers. It had like little mittens, like Gumpy, basically. Not gloves, but hands were mitten-shaped. It was motioning to me like it wanted me to come outside. And I go, oh my God, somebody's got to see this. You know, just like by Incident 74, somebody's going to see it. No one will believe me. So I ran into the bedroom to get my wife. And this is where I don't think she had anything to do with the incident, but I could not wake her up. I sat her up in bed and she became conscious and said, you know, you got to come out here. You got to see this. You got to look at this. You got to come. You got to come. And she goes, all right, you know, I'll come out there. And I had her setting up in bed. And I ran back to the living room, fully expecting I was going to look through that window and it was going to be gone. You know, that's how these things usually work, right? But I look through there, it's still there. The thing raises its arm again and it's motioning to me to come out. And I look back to see if Marsha's coming out, and she's not. And I go, oh my God, she's not coming out. I got to get her. So I went back and she's gone, laid back down. She's back asleep. So this time I throw the covers off her, swing her feet out of the bed and pull up. I said, you've got to get up. You got to come see this. And I had her sitting on the edge of the bed. It would be facing south towards the vanity in the bedroom. And she's sitting up on the edge of the bed, feet on the floor. Said, you got to come out here. So I ran back into the living room. Again, expect I'm going to look through the window here, peeking through the drapes, and it's going to be gone. But this time I looked through, and it's still there. The thing is still in the doorway, motioning to me. But now the bungalow, which is to the would be to the southwest of it. There were these little bungalows in the trailer court. These are tiny. These places were so small. It was like if you took a tool shed and turned it into a house. And they were very tiny. And there was what we referred to as the hippie couple lived in this particular bungalow. I never had a conversation with them, but we would see them. We knew they had no car, and you go by their place, you smell, marijuana coming out of it. And, we'd see them walking around, no shoes, and typical hippies for the time. But they were outside, southwest of the craft, standing there in their night clothes. The female was wearing a long, dark T-shirt, and he was in like, what do you call, hospital greens, kind of tie pants and a T-shirt. And they were just staring off at this. They weren't looking at the craft. They weren't looking at me.
They just looked zombified, but their eyes were open. And I could clearly see them with the light that was coming off this ship. And so I looked down the hallway to the bedroom to see if my wife was coming. And I could see her sitting on the edge of the bed. I thought, oh, she'll be here in a second. I don't want this to get away. I'm going to step outside here and get a good look. So I opened the door and stepped out onto the steps of the trailer, which I had just put AstroTurf on. So I remember feeling the prickliness of the AstroTurf. The next thing I saw or felt was like a rusty bar underneath my feet. And I'm looking off into the night sky. I can feel my hands are suspended. I'm hanging from a rusty ladder. I'm on a silo. And I recognized where I was right away. It was about 3.5 miles from where I lived. It was a satellite campus of the University of Arizona, which interestingly enough, although we didn't know anything about cattle mutilations at the time, that was the satellite that dealt with animal husbandry and breeding for cattle there. And they had a large supply of cattle there. And these silos were part of the campus. And those silos are still there to this day. And I'm hanging out inside like, what the hell? How did I get here? Why am I here? And I look down, and at the bottom of the ladder is this little gray alien. And then it all came back to me. I got, oh, I was just looking at this egg-shaped landing craft. I was on the stairs at the trailer, and now I'm here. This must have something to do with that. And I'm looking down at this thing, and
how far up would you say you were on the silo when you came conscious on this and realized where you were at with the little alien below you?
I was a good ways up. I had to be about 15, 20 feet up on this silo. I was in a precarious position. I'm glad I was holding on, because it would have been a fatal fall from that height. But I'm looking down at this thing, and I can see it in the moonlight. And just to make the record straight on the description of these things, and I'm boasting here, but I am a trainer mover. And I can see why people get the idea that their heads are so large. I would just, it's just the untrained eye looking at it. It's like when people look down the barrel of a gun, they think that, they're looking down a cannon. But their heads are large, but only in proportion to their body. It'd be like taking an adult head and putting it on a skinny 12-year-old's body. That would be the proportion. And like Moody said, he looked almost Asian in appearance. Their eyes are much larger than human eyes, but not freakishly large like you see in some of the depictions. They're not as large as a cow's eye or horse's eye would be, but they're considerably larger than a human eye. And they have those Asian-like eyelids, Oriental-like eyelids.
Right. Now, did you see them as giant, just blackness, or did you see like iris pupil kind of stuff going along with it within the darkness?
I was so high up, I couldn't make out a pupil, but other, like Betty Andreessen and Moody, both shared with me that they could detect irises in the eyes.
Yep.
And if they're like
Same here.
many mammals, I think their larger eye is attributed to their ability to see better in darkness. And it might be evolved from years of space travel.
Or
because if
years of living underground or underneath our oceans, or a combination of both.
Yeah, exactly. Because when the human eye, what humans are able to perceive colors because they have a larger number of color cones on the back of the retina than they do black and white. Whereas most other mammals have a larger number of black and white receptors, so they can see in the dark better. And I think if you were to expand the human retina to a much larger size, you would have an increased number of black and white cones to color cones. And I think that's the reason why, and why they're more comfortable moving around in darkness. I don't think it has anything to do with them being stealthy. I don't see anything stealthy about if they're going to land at a friggin' trailer park on the edge of Tucson. And we were near the geographic edge of Tucson at that time. I mean, we were in walking distance of the foothills where we lived. And they're going to land there. They're not trying to be stealthy at all. I think they absolutely don't care. I mean, we've added up maybe as many as 50,000 credible sightings annually around the world, daylight and at night. And so I don't think there's anything stealthy. To them, I think it's just like walking past an anthill. You know, they don't care if we see them or not. You know, they're as they just said to Moody, they're simply explorers, scientists, doctors, traders. They're here for exploration purposes. They don't care if we see them or not. So anyway, when I see this thing at the base of at the bottom of the ladder, suddenly I'm looking in its eyes, and I look at it, and I don't know why I thought this. I like recognize this thing, and I go like, "Oh, that's my friend. I've known him for years. Oh, he's such a good friend." And I promised him that if they let me go with him, when it was time to go back, I wouldn't fuss or, make a fight or anything. And I hear in my head, "Alan, it's time to come down. We have to go now." And I go, yeah, that's right. I promised I wouldn't fuss or anything. And so I start climbing down. And then the next thing, I wake up and it's morning. It's like I had gone unconscious, and I wake up in my bed, and my wife is already up. She's standing on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair. But one thing that was interesting is I was laying on her side of the bed, which I don't know if it's the same with your partner. We have our own sides of the
Everyone
bed.
sleeps on their own side of the bed. We all have our own sleeping domain. I can go ahead, and I'm sure even Mike, or Michael for that matter, you could even attest to that one.
Yeah. And it would have been, I would never have been on that other side of the bed, but I was on the other side of the bed, and she was on literally where I had sat her the night before, and she's sitting there brushing her hair. Every morning when she'd get up and brush her hair 100 times. That was her routine. And she goes, "Oh, good morning, sleepyhead." And I go like, "Oh, yeah, good morning." And she says, "Hey," she says, "why were you trying to wake me up last night?" And it just all flooded back. I go, "Oh my God, I was trying to wake you up last night." And I said, "You remember that?" And she says, "Yeah, why were you trying to wake me up?" And I paused for a second. I thought, well, do I tell her because there was alien craft in the driveway? I go, just a second. I said, "I want to check the mail." This is Saturday morning. What the hell? It was certainly not my thing to get up and go check the mail Saturday morning first thing. So I jump out of bed, put some pants on, and I'm going outside. What I wanted to do was check and see if there's any physical evidence where this craft had been, and if there was any like landing marks or anything like that. And so I'm walking through down the hallway through the kitchen. I look up at the kitchen ceiling, and there are these prominent holes where I had smacked the ceiling with the broom handle. I go, you would think that, oh my God, that means I really was there and this thing really happened. I'm going to get help or put holes in the ceiling on this trailer. Well, I go like that. But oh my God, that means it was real. I was really here. I was really smacking the broom, and my attention was there to look out the window. So I went outside, and where this thing had been sitting, it was halfway on the driveway, which was paved asphalt, and halfway on the side where it was caliche. Caliche is like a desert, it's almost like cement. It's pieces of sandstone and aggregate, and it's very, very hard. But there was no indication that anything had landed there that night. There was nothing there. And I thought, are you still there?
Oh, we're here. We're listening very intently, my friend. It's a shame you never learned how to electrify the outside of your trailer.
Yeah, there was no lights or anything that night. The only thing that was illuminating that area was that craft. So I'm walking back from the area. I think, geez, should I tell my wife? Should I call Jim? I need to think about this because I'd seen what had happened to other people that had gone public. I mean, they got divorced, and I honestly at the time I was having some marital problems. And I go like, the last thing I need to do is tell her that I saw a UFO land in the driveway. She'd have me freaking committed. And I go like, I don't think I'm gonna tell her. I thought, well, maybe I could tell Jim on the QT, but they're going to want to come out, take Geiger counter things, see if there's any radiation, and it's going to be a big thing, and the paper's going to. So I thought, I'm just going to think about this. So I went back, and my wife asked me again, why were you trying to wake me up last night? She says, this is very, very irritating. And I said, it was the cats. The cats were on the roof again. She says, that's why you were trying to wake me up. So we both were sleeping. I'm sorry, it was just very irritating. And so I didn't say anything. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be in touch with Jim here in the weekend. Maybe I'll tell him, maybe I won't. I don't know. So this is Saturday. That Wednesday, I'm coming home, and I had just gone inside. It was about 3 p.m. I hear a knock on the door. And it was the manager of the trailer park. Don was his name, elderly guy. And I thought, what's up? Rent's not due. Why are they knocking? And I said, hey, Don, what's up? And he goes like, hey, Hal. He goes, have you seen the hippie couple over there in the bungalow recently? And I hadn't even thought about them after that Saturday night. And it flashed in my mind, oh my God, the last time I saw them, they were standing outside this UFO in their night clothes. Well, I'm not going to tell him that. I go no, why you ask? And he goes, he says, I think they skipped out on me. He says, the rent was due and they're always very good at paying. And he says, they're not there. I knocked on the door. They're not there. And I want to go inside, but I want to go by myself. Can you come with me? See if they skipped out on me. And I go like, okay, sure. And I knew they had no car, so it's not like they're going to, get in their car and go someplace. They used to walk down to the grocery store down the road on Alberton and stuff. I knew they weren't very mobile, so if they took off, they would have been carrying everything they owned on their back. So we entered through, there were 2 doors, front door that went into the living room and another door that went into the kitchen. We went in through the kitchen door. And the dining room table, and it's a very small place. The dining room table was still set as if they just finished dinner and left the plates there, and all the other dirty dishes were in the sink. It clearly looked like somebody had been there recently and just left everything it was. And we went through the living room and then into the bedroom, and the bed was unmade, but they still had clothes hanging in the closet. There were still clothes in the drawers, and in the tiny bathroom, they still had all their stuff in the medicine cabinet. So it did look like they had left and taken off. They were just not there.
Wow. How long were they? Did they ever come back?
No.
Oh,
not
wow.
while I was there. And Don says, if I don't see him back, he says, I'm going to make a police report, which he told me he did. Now, back in those days, and he told me the police told him, hey, it's a civil matter. If they skipped out on rent, you're going to have to take them to court. You're not likely to find them if they took off because, they're hippies. They just probably split. And I go like, what do I say? The last time I saw them, they were outside a UFO. I mean, they locked me up. So I didn't say anything. And the longer I waited, I'm still very busy with APRO. We're coming on. We're getting ready to release. We've done. This was before this thing in March. I had interviewed Jesse Marcel. It was a telephone interview. And contrary to people's belief that Roswell didn't come about no knowledge of it came out until the 1980s. That's not true at all. We knew about Roswell, we knew about Corona, St. Augustine, Cape Girardeau, Kingsman crash. We knew about all these crash and UFO recoveries. We'd heard it was common knowledge. And when I interviewed Jesse, which would have been before this incident in March, so sometime in February, what he shared with me was nothing that I didn't already know. And some of the questions I had for him was, you know, did you see any bodies? Did you see an intact craft? And he said no to both of them. Now, he did sound very guarded about what he was sharing with me. This was his first actual interview with anybody. So, you know, I think he was cautious. But he had reached out to Jim at AFRO. Of course, Jim being an Air Force individual too, I suspect that that's why Jesse reached out to him, because he was a fellow Air Force guy. And we had on-camera interview with him for the 1979 release of UFOs Are Real, which was produced by Brandon Chase, which I just learned from Steve Bissett. Brandon was a CIA asset, which I just learned that this last week. I had no idea.
I have to ask, around the same time, wasn't Disney also working on something to go ahead and bring out the truth about UFOs that eventually it got pulled at the last minute?
I've heard those rumors. I don't have any direct evidence or knowledge of it. I know Disney did a lot of work with NASA. And it was interesting that when Jim shared that they were going to reveal the history between the government, the Air Force, and NASA, because NASA has always denied anything, you know, to do with any military, association. But everybody knows they have, it's common, it's not just common knowledge, it's open source that they, do satellites and stuff for the military. And like Project Corona, which was the first spy satellite they launched, which was a launch on I believe it was Mercury Redstone. It was concealed under that as Project Discovery. And that satellite was built right here in the Bay Area in Palo Alto. So, and they had, after that, they had Corona, they had Hexagon, and Gambit were all three NASA launched secret spy satellites. And again, that's open source. It's not anything confidential, but they hid them as actual exploration things but they were actually spy satellites and dual purpose. So Von Braun had done a number of Disney produced films that Von Braun narrated and had on camera appearances with in the run up to the moon landing. And said that Von Braun's nurse has always claimed that Von Braun confessed to her that there was, non-human intelligence and that they'd been hiding it, and NASA was involved, the military was involved. And again, we didn't have proof, but we suspected that in the 70s, with Springfield's work on recoveries. And that was one of the things. And I've shared that a partial file that I had from the recovery file at APRO. I shared that with Richard. He has that now on all the information we had about recoveries back in the 70s. So it was well known. It was not a surprise at all. So anyway, they released that film, and I went to LA for the release and spoke personally to Brandon. I did have an on-camera appearance in that documentary, but it didn't make the cut, which was a funny story anyway, but for another time. But the documentary was well received and was one of the big hits that year in 79. It was also, I believe, the same year that Von Daniken released Chariots of the Gods during that time.
No, this is actually a piece that I've never watched. It's something I'm going to have to go ahead and search and find a copy of it to go ahead and watch it.
It's on YouTube. You can find the whole
Yep.
thing on YouTube. I have to say, the first UFO film footage they have on there, and we told them not to use it. As a technical advisor, so do not use this.
But they used it anyway.
They used it anyway. It is a picture, supposedly, of a UFO flying over Catalina Island. It is not a UFO. It is a Piper Cub. We work closely with the Kodak Center up in Phoenix, Arizona, and we had frames. That was an 8mm camera that took that video. Or it wasn't video; it was film. And we had blown up as big as a wall, and you can clearly see the shadow of the fixed wing above the cabin. It's a Piper Cub,
Right.
and we estimated the travel at 120 miles an hour, which is what the Piper Cubs traveled at. And there's a landing strip there on Catalina Island.
But it's interesting though. There is video footage that was shot by people who were high up in Lockheed Martin at the time that has pictures of like Tic Tacs flying over Catalina. So, granted,
Catalina is no doubt a hot spot. It definitely is a hot spot, and I was working for a company after '84. I don't want to mention who, but I had an opportunity for a long time directly at Catalina all night long, and I never saw a thing out there. I always wanted to. I would hope to see something, but I never saw anything. But clearly, it definitely is a hot spot. Many people did. Many things. There are many good observations, photographs, video, and stuff are well attested to. But I never saw anything. My two incidents were 1974 and 1979. That was it. But the 1979 one greatly impacted me, and I just didn't want anything to do with the subject. It just, to me, at that time, got too weird. And I thought that I had brought it on myself by my association with APRO and interviewing all these abductees and making myself very, out there on it. And I thought, what's next? Might I disappear like the hippie couple? I mean, it's just like, I don't want anything to do with this. And so, I was offered a job working at a model lab in Southern California. I thought this is a good time. Like I said, I was having marital problems. Time we'll start anew. We'll go to Southern California. We'll get a regular house, and it'll be all, roses and stuff. Of course, it never happens that way. But I was giving APRO the slow no, and I did have continued communication with Jim and Coral and Ray Fowler and stuff as we continued to investigate the Betty Andreessen case. But I was giving them the slow no, that I just really didn't want anything to do with it. And I thought at some time, years from now, when I'm older, retired, maybe I'll revisit this. And it did come up. Wendell would contact me every once in a while. And when Crusoe made public his announcement, a friend of mine that I worked with knew Corso and had arranged for me to go out. I believe he was living, I think it was in Florida at the time, I forget. But I was going to go out and interview him, but he passed away before I had an opportunity to. And George Knapp had already interviewed him at that time, but he passed away before I got to him. And I was working in areas again, I want to stress, in a private sector capacity, though, and I've sent you my documents, that I did work with Homeland Security. At the time I started with the Joint Terrorist Task Force. Then I was doing lectures at the police for San Francisco and Oakland PD on counterterrorism and counterterrorism surveillance, and Joint Terrorist Task Force turned into Homeland Security, and I put together with Governor Schwarzenegger the Homeland Security grant thing that spread from California across the country to get grants for to harden terrorist targets, first in the Bay Area, but we expanded it to all of California and then the entire country. I'm proud to say that we brought $5.5 million in grants to San Francisco area because we knew that there were definitely targets. And again, despite what people think about false flags, no, there was a legitimate, I guarantee you, there was a legitimate targeting by these guys that were just coming at us from every which way. I remember one point, I forget which year it was, but within 1 week, we stopped five, in a week's time, 5 different active shooter plots in a single week. And those people will never hear about those, but they definitely were occurring. We had as many as 2,000 jihadists, not under surveillance, unfortunately, but that we knew of in the Bay Area by itself during the time I was working there. And but it wasn't until after I retired, I had heard 2 podcasts that Richard had done about APRO. And I go, well, that's something I know about. And he lamented in the APRO thing, well, why didn't Jim and Coral ever assign anybody to take over for them? And I go, I'm thinking it was me. I left them high and dry, but they wanted me to. And they passed away shortly after. I think Jim passed away in 86 and Coral in 88. And I go with me. So I reached out to Richard, finally got a hold of him, and started relationship with him, shared with what had happened and all the different things that had occurred that people didn't know about. And it's been my mission since then to not, as Richard also said, not to forget our history about this stuff, because a lot of it's already being forgotten. And I'm also one of the founding members of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, which just got its own 501(c)(3).
That's headed up by Stephen Bassett, isn't it?
Yes. Who's a great guy and has done so much to try and bring this forward, and through his efforts, as well as many others, that this, I definitely expect a revelation coming, despite where it's going to be a catastrophic disclosure or not. I've outlined in some of my interviews that I think it could be just as easy what I call scapegoat disclosure, where they disclose it and blame it on one of these military industrial complexes. Hey, they were hoarding this stuff. We didn't know anything about it. And they'll go in and raid the place and get it and say, hey, look, this is the bumper from the Roswell craft and the tail light. We had no idea they had this stuff. And then they'll deep six it again, or, it's very possible that some other, country, Russia or China, could, jump ahead and just say that they found this stuff recently. Like I postulated, hey, Russia could say, hey, we captured this in Ukraine. They were trying to give it to the Americans or the Europeans. And we had no idea they had this stuff. And we got it. And we're inviting the entire world to come and, set up shop here. And they carefully control, of course, what they saw and did. But it looked like it was a new find for them. But and we've heard rumors that, other countries are thinking of getting the first jump on it. So anything could happen, but I absolutely believe that it will come about here within this year. Too many people know about it. What I've said before is you win wars by learning your enemy's secrets and keeping yours.
Right.
Well, over the years, they've been very sloppy about it. This has always been an open secret. People say, well, no one can keep that secret. Well, they haven't. We talk about David Grush, but there have many others who have come forward. You've got, of course, Jesse Marcel, David Adair, and when Stephen did his the public congressional assembly thing, I think it was in 2004 or so, he had dozens of legitimate whistleblowers, engineers, military people, and everything that came forward and said, yes, we've worked on it, we've seen it, blah, blah, blah. And so too many people know. And now we know that, I know for a fact that not just David Grush, but his team, because everyone thinks it's just David Grush into this investigation. No, he had an entire team of investigators that went out and got this information for the UAP task force. It wasn't just him, listening to stories. These were investigators that went out on behalf of the UAP task force to find this information. They reported it to the IG for the intelligence community. All 40 of the whistleblowers, Grush, his team, the IG, all of them reported behind closed doors to the Senate Select Security Committee and the Congressional Select Permit Security Committee. That's 21 politicians right there, plus their attorneys, plus all their staffers, which are read in at the highest security. And Grush says they saw videos, photographs, eyewitness, direct testimony. So it's not hearsay. They know the whole thing. And I guarantee you, although they're sworn to secrecy, maybe the politicians didn't tell their family, but I know some of those staffers went home and said, "You'll never guess what I saw today."
Now, Grush has stated he has at least 40 people that he's put in contact with the Inspector General of the intelligence community. And that number has probably grown since that point in time. And what we're talking about is people who aren't just schmucks looking at stuff and saying, "Hey, look, I saw something in the sky." These are people who are part of the military who have a discerning eye from either their job of looking at intelligence materials or people who have actually witnessed actual craft, rather coming to work, from work, or part of work, that they're actually going ahead and trying to bring the truth out. And like as you're saying, Alan, it's getting more and more difficult to go ahead and keep the truth out. But you know what? I can say personally, I've seen that this year that there's been more ratcheting up coming from, let's call it the deep state, especially with former head of RO, Sean Kirkpatrick, going out and spreading misinformation and disinformation and trying to discount everything, including all the stuff you're talking about from David Grush and from the other 40 whistleblowers. It's a shame, but the problem is our mass media out there is when stories come is if you have someone like Sean Kirkpatrick who's not getting challenged, there's not another strong personality coming forward, his news is dominating the news cycle, which then you get one major agency that says it, and then you get this cascading effect that goes on for weeks, if not months, of the negative information being put out there to people to help raise their levels of doubt. Again, it's that misinformation, disinformation machine to go ahead and cast out, just like when we had Lou Elizondo call in here last Wednesday to go ahead and let us know what was going on. There's schmucks out there trying to say, "Oh, it's fake, it's not real, he's not messaging him, he's not calling him, we're making it up." But the reality is, when we're dealing with disclosure, you can listen to the people who say they're vetted, who think they're bringing out the truth. In reality, all you're listening to is a guy working out of a one-bedroom apartment with a pink light in his background, and he's trying to say everything else he's saying is real when it's really not. You know what I mean, Alan?
Yeah, well, one of the things the general public doesn't understand when we talk about Grush and the 40 whistleblowers, this isn't new. This happened now, it's February, which 3 years ago they testified before the Senate. And that was after testifying to the IG. So they've known for a very long time what the truth is. It preceded Arrow's formation. So the truth has been out there for a long time, and it's really too late for them to mop it up. They already spilled the milk. And you'll hear the smartest thing for them to do is absolutely say nothing, but they're not doing that because you'll notice the Air Force is saying nothing. The Navy is the one that's out there touting stuff. But the Air Force says
But
nothing.
the Navy was saying things until about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when Ronald Moultrie brought in this new classification coming in for the DOD, where it basically cut off any kind of information relating to UFOs from getting out to the public. So the Navy, yes, The Navy was the one who actually headed up the UAPTF in the past. And if you look at what the UAPTF did in their reports versus RO, the Navy was a lot more willing to bring out the truth.
Well, there's a backstory to that, and it goes all the way back to the 50s. Originally, the space program was given to the Navy, not the Air Force.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a Navy project.
Oh,
and
wow.
They screwed up Vanguard, Project Vanguard, which was supposed to be the first missile to take a satellite into orbit. It failed, and the Russians launched Sputnik. And so they pulled the space program from the Navy and gave it to the Air Force. So there's always been a rivalry between the Navy and the Air Force in regards to Space Command.
Yeah.
Because the Navy was always the one running out, catching the, capsules coming in and stuff. And but they were just the go-fors for the Air Force and NASA.
Well, you have to look at it too, Ellen, really quick. If you look at the Navy, they're the ones who are patrolling all of our seas and the skies over the seas. They have the craft of the Air Force, plus everything on the Navy on the surface, plus everything under the water for that matter. They've got a great exposure to what's going on. And what does everyone say about the UFOs? They're not just in the skies, they're under our seas. So who would have the most exposures potentially to the non-human intelligence? It would truly be the Navy.
Yes, and there, as I was sharing about the Nautilus, there have been a number of high-profile recoveries from watery locations.
Yeah.
And when you figure the planet is almost 80% water, and if these people are truly explorers, yeah, they would be, and have transmitting crafts, they could be anywhere. I don't know. I mean, people talk about them having bases here. I don't know if you have ability to, travel at light speed. I don't know. You really need base here. I mean, you could have a base on the moon or whatever.
But you may not even need light speed. You may just have to open up a gravitational warp or something that opens up between one location and the other, and you go from location to location instantly, because space is not empty. It's not clean. There's a lot of dust. There's a lot of debris everywhere. And if you're going faster than light and you're running into this stuff, you're running into stuff that's going to be hitting your ship and damaging it.
Yeah, I shared that same physics when they were when Grush was talking about craft being larger on the inside than the outside, and I said that's not surprising because of the energy it was soaking up. I said what you're seeing actually, Lazar described the interior of the ship that he worked on was completely bare bones, and I said, yeah, it's because it's more like an elevator than a spacecraft.
Right.
I said it's like what people refer to as like a jump room. You're only in there for a couple seconds, and you're at your next location because, as you said, you're opening up more of a wormhole than traveling anywhere. You're actually bending space.
And if the craft is at a different rate of time, space, and space-time for that matter, yes, we're like the humans on Earth are like frozen. Well, these craft are zipping around super fast, and because of the variance between the outside and the inside.
Yeah, and I think what they're seeing on these craft that look larger on the inside than the outside is actually you're not going into that inside. They're actually using the same gravitational field on the inside of the ship for, like, let's say, think of it, the ship as a Stargate per se.
Yeah.
You take that Stargate to some place you want to explore, let's say in the middle of New Mexico or something. You land it, and then you open a portal inside the ship that takes you back to your mothership. And so you're walking back into the mothership from your present location. And that prevents you from having to carry around a bunch of junk, for
So the craft aren't even really here. The craft is just a vessel that points back to another location in space, and they're just zipping this. Oh, wow.
Think of it as a traveling Stargate, basically.
Yeah.
A Stargate that you can move around for convenience sake from one location to another. And so when that's why the one that Grush was referring to was drinking all kinds of electricity. that they were measuring in the, I forget the amount of electricity it was taking. It's just ungodly amount. And it's because that portal was on and operating on the inside of the ship. And that's why it looked bigger on the inside than on the outside. And basically, and I said there's ways you can measure that. There's different equipment to measure. Are you still on Earth when you walk in there, or are you someplace else in a different location? Even a simple GPS device would tell you, hey, you're not in Kansas anymore once you walk in there. But that's what you're seeing there. Some of these things, the information that I've looked into, which I'm hesitant to say is actual, is like these ARVs, which say that they're using some type of electromagnetic field to travel with. I don't know, it smacks of perpetual motion and using 0-point energy. I don't know. When I've looked at the blueprints for that craft, and it seems highly dangerous, because back in the 60s, they were using pure oxygen. And it's one thing, you don't want to have a pure oxygen atmosphere inside a craft. It's discharging enormous amounts of electricity. Even a static electric spark would just turn that thing into an easy bake oven in a second. So I'm kind of hesitant about that, but there's some credible whistleblowers. I mean, people like Michael Herrera, who David has vetted and attests to. If a fraction of what he's saying is true, this is much darker situation than people imagine. Which Tucker Carlson alluded to. He said there's some things that he's heard about that he doesn't want to even share with his wife because it's so dark. And although people say, "Oh, yeah, I can handle the truth," really, can you? You don't know the whole truth, so you might find yourself complicit either by act or omission in your involvement. I'm not at all for some people said they want to give immunity to everybody. I'm like, hell no. We don't know what these people have been doing or what they've been involved in. You might grant some immunity to certain people to get them to turn state's evidence, because I keep saying this is a law enforcement situation now, and that's what's taking so long. It's not that they don't want to disclose stuff, but that the IG is looking into exactly what they need to look into: paper trails. Where's the money gone? That's what's going to bring people to bear. It's not that they're going to find a discarded UFO somewhere. It's they're going to find out how they've been funneling the money from the congressional check writing treasury, and how much is involved. And that's where you can get people, hey, we found out you've embezzled, billions of dollars. You're going to jail unless you rat everybody out. And everybody is looking like, well, do they know it's me? And that's why the Air Force, I think, has become so silent, because they're going like, the reason this all got out is because they got very sloppy with the security, and they have programs after programs after programs compartmentalized like a Russian, doll thing, one compartment after
a
compartment.
nested doll, kind of, where there's one side inside of another, inside of another,
Yeah, and eventually, after decades, everybody, like now, the government's very well known for having duplicate programs all across the country. Oh, you're doing that work? Oh, I thought we were the only ones doing that work. And that's what happened. So nobody knows who really Grush talked to, and who the IG talked to, and who turned on them. And so no one wants to poke their head, go like, well, should I come forward? Because they go like, maybe I'm not involved, and I'd just be ratting myself out if I know back from the Wilson papers that Lockheed, who's called out in that paper, wanted to get rid of their cash. And I guarantee you it was because, hey, we got everything we can out of this. We don't need these spare parts anymore. And they wanted to give it to Bigelow Aerospace, but CIA Science Division nixed that at the last moment. They put all these hoops and hurdles for Bigelow to meet the same security standards as Lockheed. And their first attempt, they failed. And they said, oh, sorry, you didn't meet our standards, so you don't get the parts. And so Harry Reid told him, no, try again. because they didn't think Bigelow, because he had to invest his own money to bring these security standards up. It wasn't anything funded by the military. So they didn't think he'd go a second round and spend his own money, but he did. And they weren't going to give him a second chance, and Reed insisted that they did. And he passed the security inspection, but then they said, no, we're still not going to give you the stuff. And the CIA Science Division stepped in and said, no, you're not going to get it. And so whether or not it's still at Lockheed or CIA Science took it and sent it to Wright-Patterson and somewhere else, we don't know. I'm sure some of it's overseas as well. We have, black labs everywhere, all across the world. Everyone's familiar with that. I mean, during the Ukraine operation, they had like 20, according to congressional statements. I'm not releasing anything that wasn't attested to in Congress openly, in open sources. They have 20 chemical warfare, biological warfare labs in Ukraine. You don't think they have any, kinetic labs anywhere across the planet? Of course they do.
Alan, we've gone for a while here for a little bit, but this is one thing I want to jump on to. People look at some of the stuff, potentially what Monsanto has done and the biologics and everything we're looking at. One of the things that people out there may or may not think is we may be looking at some of these extraterrestrial, the non-human intelligences, and saying, okay, how do these things work? But more importantly, how biologically can we kill these things off without affecting us? What can we use for warfare against these things, where if they come after us, they come after our planet, that we have our own defense? It may not be a weapon of mass destruction, but more of a biological weapon that could put up a barrier to keep them away from us.
Well, Kit Green, again, and I'm not disclosing anything that he hasn't come up with. Dr. Kit Green, who was a CIA scientist, said concerning the Remelson case, which is a very famous case, 1980, that they do have technologies to bring these craft down.
Yeah.
Electromagnetic pulse. And in the case of the Omaha, the Oklahoma, and the Franklin, where they had those pyramid-shaped UFOs, one of the ships did try and use the electromagnetic pulse weapon to try and bring those down unsuccessfully.
No effect.
It didn't have any effect, and there could be many reasons for that. But so they do have weapons that they've used, but this new age stuff where they think, oh, if we only had this energy source and we could, make the deserts bloom, which aren't like, no. I mean, it'd be like dropping a nuclear reactor in ancient Rome. There's no infrastructure for it. I mean, the cyclotron that Lazar was working with, that's not going to power your iPhone. It's not going to heat your house. And even if you could build duplicate ones, it'd be way too expensive to make one that would be portable that you could use at home. I would say maybe in decades, you might glean more along the line of material sciences, what the ships are made of, or maybe something like, as you shared, biologically that might be useful. But it's not gonna revolutionize science. Even if they were to say tomorrow, yeah, here are the ships, go at it, get the best minds on this. It's not gonna change. Industry just doesn't change that quickly.
Yeah.
The first electric motor patented in the United States, I forget the guy's name who patented. He couldn't even read and write, but he invented the first electric motor. His wife, who was a school teacher, helped him with the notes and the patent. It was 60 years before that would ever apply to anything. Even the steam engine, which was the ancient Greeks, Aristotle made the first steam engine. That wasn't used. It was theorized again in the 1700s, but it wasn't put to use till the 1800s. It's only when entrepreneurs and out of the box thinkers latch onto an idea and are willing to apply it to something novel and new. The first fax machine was invented and tested, get this, in 1890. 1890. And the inventor demonstrated to investors, and he faxed a document from Paris to London. And their reaction was like, so what? Why do we need anything like this? Now, it didn't look like a fax machine like you'd see today. It looked like a electrical kind of pendulum looking thing, but it actually worked, and you could use it as fax. And it's the basis for the fax machines that when it came out in the late 50s. But if you had one of these things, it's very unlikely to do anything. It's not going to change anything about our use of oil, which I know that's canard. Well, because everyone thinks fuel is what we use. That's not even the main thing that we use oil products for. It's not at all. The major use for petroleum products are pharmaceutical drugs. That's the number one use. 99.9% of all oil-based products are used for pharmaceuticals.
Pharmaceuticals and plastics.
Yeah, well, no, actually, pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. Plastics is third on what's called the oil platform, the oil stack, they call it.
Yeah.
Fuels are number 9. Lubricants are number 10. But the top 3 are pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and plastics.
Interesting.
And that's not going to change. In fact, if you found some other fuel source for cars to use, you would simply make things so much cheaper. There would be a larger use of petroleum products, and people think that petroleum, they call it fossil fuels. Fossil fuels. That's again a misnomer. Fossil fuels are not from dinosaurs. In fact, there's more fossil fuel and petroleums on Titan, one of the moons of Saturn, than there is on Earth. And that's because hydrocarbons are not produced from, this is part of the production is from decaying plants and animals, but hydrocarbons are created in the center, deep within the Earth, from the combination from pressure from hydrogen and carbon. Same way carbon is heated and compressed makes diamonds. Hydrocarbons, hydrogen and carbons are compressed to make hydrocarbons, petroleum, and that leaks up through the cracks of the Earth and creates these petroleum. It's one of the canards that during the Carter administration, we're going to run out of petroleum products, but they could explain how the oil reserves in the Gulf kept refilling. Well, it's because of they're produced deeply within the Earth. Mars has more hydrocarbons free flow. On Saturn, it flows in the atmosphere. So hydrocarbons are we're never going to give up the use of hydrocarbons. Again, that's just a canard. It's just we don't want to release this because it'll destroy the petroleum industry. Not in the least. They don't want to release it because if it's exposed, they've been lying about the very nature of reality and hoarding these things. If we can't have it, nobody can have it. Hoarding these things for decades, it will disable their authority over us. I refer to it as the prison planet. And everyone would be upset and go like, well, hell, what else have you been hiding from us? And have these creatures want to communicate with us and you told them not to? So that's the real play. It has nothing to do with we're going to get off the hydrocarbon cycle. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So the deserts aren't going to bloom. But could we benefit in some way from this stuff? It was in the wider scientific community, sure. But it's just like nobody wants to give up the Coca-Cola formula either because they're making Coca-Cola. So they want to give that away. So or the 24 herbs and spices in Colonel Sanders' recipe. They want to hold on to that. Even if they're the only ones and they could make more money if they got rid of it, they no, this is our baby. We're not sharing it with anybody. And that's what this is all about.
Gotcha. What a great time. We've been on here for almost 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's been a great call with you, Alan. Would you be willing to come back on again to talk about more of this stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
Yeah.
It'd be my pleasure. And we'll make sure we have a good connection. I don't know what happened here, but I never.
You know,
it never
I
came
think we're
back
dealing
on.
with a whole bunch of solar activity, which is something that's starting to kick up a lot now, and a lot of the major networks out there are having issues. It was great. I had the backup of a photo, which I've had to replace a couple times because my screenshot application wasn't working exact right. One thing I did want to bring up before we ended this was you had shared a picture with us coming from a permanent display at the San Francisco Cartoon Museum that you put together of Batman, and you were saying before this is one of their most popular exhibits, and this is something you put together on your own, right?
Well, yeah. Well, they knew about me. I actually began. That's one of the galleries there with my work. That's a much larger exhibit than what you see there. There's pieces, the costumes from and props from all the Warner Brothers movies. Warner Brothers. I was a technical advisor for the Ultimate Batman Encyclopedia, and they wanted me to do an exhibit based on the Warner Brothers franchise of all their Batman costumes and props and stuff. And so I created that exhibit for the museum. It was only supposed to go for 3 months, but it's become a permanent exhibit there. It's been there for quite a few years now. I also have a Wonder Woman exhibit there, a bunch of stuff I did for Disney and Marvel. And then down in San Diego, I have some permanent exhibits down there at the new San Diego Comic-Con museum in Balboa Park, which is a very large museum down there. And there's a lot of my work there from Warner Brothers and Marvel costumes and props and stuff. And we're going to hopefully we were going to expand and do even more this year there. We've expanded. Again, those were supposed to be temporary exhibits, but they've become permanent. They wanted me to do another exhibit, but that's been bumped to next year. But we may be doing something else this year. We'll see before the year's out. We never know. I've never solicited. I've been very blessed. I've never had to solicit any of the film work I've done. I've always just got a phone call or an email. Hey, can you do this? I mean, all the work I did for Lucas, that was just fell on top of me.
Now, Lucas, you're
I
talking
never,
about going ahead and doing the designs for Luke Skywalker's outfit, right?
well, it was what happened is I was working for another company doing Marvel props and stuff, and they said they had a phone call from Lucas, and they wanted to talk to me in the archives. And they said, hey, we just found 2 full hero costumes. We believe they're the only surviving costumes from the original film. We'd like you. They apparently knew my reputation from the people I was working with. They wanted me to authenticate them initially. And I said, oh, I'd be glad to, because I'm here in the Bay Area and very near Lucas's ranch. And so they had me go out. I was very high security there as well. They went out and was invited to the archives, but it's just like going into a military institution. You know, they take your cell phone and everything.
Oh, yeah. In some ways, it's almost more difficult to get information about the movies out than it is to get out information out about UFOs.
Oh, it was very strict. And he has cameras everywhere. One time what's that creature they had in the last 3 films? Jar Jar Binks. A statue of Jar Jar Binks on the loading dock. I was making fun of it. And the curator, no. Got cameras everywhere. You'll get really mad if you make fun of Bar Jar Jar.
That's something I wish we could have a time change that happened, that Jar Jar Binks never occurred.
No, so I went in, they showed me the pieces, I looked at them, and I authenticated them, but I identified them. Now, these weren't from the original movie, they were from the 3rd film because of the type of handguards they had, but they were, truly Harrison Ford's complete costume and Mark Hamill's complete costume. So they said, hey, can you make copies of these? Because we want to put them, they have a traveling museum. And they said, the only thing we have in the traveling museum is a copy from, what's the online magazine? The online magazine that sells collectibles and stuff. I forget the name of it. They bought a copy of the display of Stormtrooper. I can't think of the name of that. But So it's just fiberglass mannequins, and I kind of got a kick out of that. They weren't even showing a real stormtrooper costume because they're much different than people. They got the 501, was a fan based institution that really loves stormtroopers and stuff. And I spoke to those guys and I said, look, you got it wrong. I point out different things that they did wrong on their costumes. Well, anyway, so they had me come in and make copies. I had an assistant. Initially, they were very tight, but eventually they loosened up on us and they let us take pictures in the archives. And those pictures nobody's ever seen those. And now all the archives were transferred to the Presidio, and they're going to make a museum there. But I did some other work for Lucas after that with the TIE fighters and stuff. And so it was a great experience. And they sit on the board of the San Francisco Cartoon Art Museum, along with Pixar and Disney. And I've done a lot of work with them. But again, it's nothing I've ever solicited. I've always been very blessed that they just ring me up and say, hey, can you do this? It's nothing like people imagine. It's not like people have this image of studio work like, it's something you go to a studio 9 to 5. That's not what it's like. Nothing like that at all. There are 15,000 people. I worked on Iron Man 1 and 2. 15,000 people are in the credits. The only time I ever met Downey Jr. was at a convention, and he was just walking by me. I never spoke to him, but I worked on both movies. I worked on First Avenger, did the helmet for Chris for that, and also for Winter Soldier. But again, that I did those in my studio. You send it, Ed did this work, did it not work? It's not like people imagine. Even the government work I've done, and I think I've sent you pictures of. I designed the ballistic armor for the second level Humvees for the first Iraq War, and they met me at my office. I had an office at that time in San Francisco, and they were referred to me by another subcontractor.
Yeah,
they needed something designed overnight, basically. I always share with people it took me 2 days to do that. It actually was literally overnight. And when they said how much you want, I told them. They said, when can you start? I said, I don't know. I said, I need plans, And they said, well, when do you return to your studio? I said, I'll be there tonight at 6:30.
Yeah.
And they said, we'll have someone meet you there. And my studio is actually in my home. And when I got home, there was a Army colonel with a crate with a Humvee door in it. They said, they want you to start on this. This is the most vulnerable part. And I said, okay. And I literally had to design something and mock up with ballistic nylon and some other things, a prototype, and send that off to a place on the East Coast overnight. And at that time, Kinko's was the only overnight place I could FedEx anything. And I told my director, who I was working with for the Joint Terrorist Task Force, hey, look, I won't be in today because I got to do this stuff. And I told him what I was doing, and I sent that off overnight. Literally sent off overnight. Yeah. And they made 40 copies, and one did get hit by a roadside bomb, but everyone survived. Didn't even have a bad sunburn. But I heard that it lifted the Humvee about 10 feet off the ground. But everyone was safe, which I was happy about.
Well, I have to say this has been one amazing conversation with you. I appreciate you coming out and spending time with us, Alan. If you can hold on a little bit after the show, there may be a couple people in the back who want to ask some questions of you, if that would be okay with you.
Absolutely fine.
All right. And as we usually say at the end of every broadcast, a disclosure tonight, eyes open, no fear. Be safe, everyone. We'll catch you on the flip side. Take care. See you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.